I saw a really great quote the other day that it was from Suzanne Goldsmith. She said something like, no, I'm paraphrasing. So it's like something like communities are not built of friends or groups within similar styles and tastes, or even people who like and understand each other, but they're built of people who feel they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. So that's also an interesting one, because it's like, okay, what is actually important? What is it that is truly important?
Lexigo presents The Native Experience with your host, Brian.
Hello, world. This is Brian from Lexigo.com, and you are listening to the Native Experience podcast, the show that recommends that you double-check everything, just in case. Today, we are talking with Edwin Trebels, Translations Director at Philadelphia Church of God. Oh, I'm excited for this conversation. It's going to be great, so buckle in and get ready to take some notes. A little bit about Edwin. He's the Translations Director at the Philadelphia Church of God, as I mentioned, which is a global nonprofit. Edwin directs the localization department, which offers localization from English into 9 languages. He's worked in localization for almost 20 years. And in 2023, his team translated and published about 4.5 million words, divided by 9 languages, and interpreted about 2 million words. Incredible. Edwin is mostly engaged in and loves project vendor change management and strategy. And he has a strong focus on pre-press, training, and some marketing on the side too. Now, outside of work, Edwin loves spending time with his wife, 4 children, 12, 9, 5, and 11 months, by the way, as well as his family and friends. They have 3 dogs, mainly due to Edwin, 2 rats and a cat, mainly due to his wife. And he's been smoking barbecue food most weekends. They take combined voice lessons, and he also plays the guitar and probably needs to get going on that before it gathers too much dust. I got to tell you what, Edwin is quite the multi-passionate, lots of interests, so I think our conversation is going to reflect that today. So let's get into it and let's have some fun. Edwin, welcome to the Native Experience. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, Brian.
Of course. Well, first of all, we want to make sure that the correct pronunciation is Edwin. Is that did I say it correctly?
Yeah, that's the Dutch pronunciation. Edwin Trebels. Yep.
I love that.
Most people just call me Edwin Trebels.
Yeah, I know. I know it's interesting. We have this conversation quite a bit on the show of pronunciations and how, depending on the dialect or the accents or the part of the world that you're in, people, they try to get it right, but they don't always. And it depends on how you pronounced, like in the United States, a W is a W, pronunciation. But obviously in other parts of the country, it's more of a V pronunciation. So I love that. I think it's kind of fun to hear what is the correct pronunciation. But again, we might confuse people because they wouldn't know who Edwin is, right? Because they'd be like, wait, right. Who's this guy?
Right. Some of my friends would know, but that's about it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, tell us about yourself. Talk about yourself personally, professionally, and you got to share what you're nerding out on too for fun right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm Dutch, but I lived in several countries, so I sound a bit American for that reason. Lived in other countries. I'm in the UK now for the second time. I've been in the localization industry for 19 years now.
Oh wow, nice.
But I'm more from. I actually studied sports science, like sports management for 3 years, and then liberal arts for 4 years. So I'm not necessarily a linguist as such.
Sure.
But I do speak Dutch as my first language, and then speak a bit of English, and then studied German and French in high school. But that's about it.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's great.
Nerding out. I've been studying Toyota Kata about the ways of process management in the car industry, and how they also improve upon their processes constantly and help coach people and such. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Okay, so is this actually from the car maker itself, Toyota doing? Is this a process that they use, or is this something completely separate from the car maker?
Yeah, no, it comes from, the thinking comes from Toyota, but a lot of other car makers use it. A lot of production people use it. It's not really I feel like it's not spoken about as much in the localization industry, but it has been a topic of conversation recently, more so, I think. And lean management comes from that also, but that's more that's not quite as thorough of an approach as the Toyota Kata method.
Interesting. Okay, well, we'll dive into that here in a few minutes because I want to hear more about that and what you're learning and what you would recommend with it too. So a little bit more about you though. So what else about you? What give us a little bit of your personal background. And you said you're in the UK right now. Is that where you're living, or are you just visiting right now?
No, I live here.
Okay.
So I've lived here since 2016.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I was in the Netherlands until I was 21. I left in 2003, went to the United States, went to Israel on an archaeological excavation, then England, to America, and then back to England in 2016. So I've been all over with my family. I've got 4 children.
Nice.
Between ages 1 and 12, and 3 dogs, 2 rats, and it's because of my wife, she likes them for some reason, and then a cat and all sorts of interests. There's always something going on in our household with piano playing and guitar playing and barbecuing and all sorts.
I love it. The variety.
Yeah.
Well, going through your biography, it's amazing the amount of different things that you've done, which I absolutely love, by the way. You've got such a passion for so many different things, and I'm in that same boat. I love a variety of things. I feel like somebody says, well, what are your hobbies? I'm going, how much time do you have? I have way too many interests right now, and it's always something new. Yeah. And as a friend of mine put it, he was like, I never get bored. And I said, yeah, me neither. Never get bored. There's always something to experience and learn and do. And there's always a new food to try. There's always something, So I appreciate that zest for life and the curiosity and all that. How do you stay focused?
Hey, that's a good question. Yeah. That is an issue, possibly.
Yeah.
I've learned over the years, to isolate myself more. So naturally, I'm more of an extrovert. Enjoy talking to people all the time and all sorts. But nice. I've learned the value of isolation. So I have my do not disturb, and I've got my headset on, even if I'm not playing anything, and trying to really focus in on something deeply. And blocks of time, scheduling your meetings with yourself sounds a bit funny.
Yeah. No,
sounds a bit funny, but rather than having all these back-to-back meetings, also scheduling time out for important projects. That's how I do it.
I've heard that before, especially in the entrepreneurial side of things, where people say you need to schedule meetings with yourself because otherwise everyone else will schedule time for you with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a very good point. No, I love that. I think it's, in fact, I heard another person talk about the value of solitude, and he was talking about the difference between solitude and isolation. Isolation is not necessary. You don't necessarily choose isolation, but you do choose solitude. And he was just talking about, and I'd never thought about the differences between these two words until he said that. But I really liked it because he was talking about solitude as a way to recharge, even as an extrovert, because I'm an extrovert as well. And so as much as I love being around people most of the time, that's what energizes me. There are times of solitude that I absolutely need to have. And, those are the times where you can just kind of stop the noise, let the creativity come or whatever, maybe you're learning through something right now and you need to kind of process through that. So I think it's great that you're doing that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I guess life is a lot about proportioning, right? So you make sure that everything fits in the schedule. Otherwise, things get crowded out very easily.
Yeah, it's true. Balance too, and boundaries, which I'm having a hard time learning right now. It's always difficult. So tell us what you do then with Philadelphia Church of God.
Yeah, I'm the localization department director. So I help with the localization of our products. So we do all sorts of things: videos, magazines, literature, podcasts, blog posts, all sorts. Nice. We go to 10 languages. So we go from English to 10 different languages. And we have 5 full-time employees, 10 part-time, mostly in production, because we do the production within the department. But then what's interesting about the linguists is that they're pro bono assisting us from the community. So they they're helping us as volunteers, and they we still set them up in an order where we have a very high level of quality. So we have some people are very, very good at editing. Others are perhaps not as familiar with editing, but they still want to help, and then we just find the right place for them in the process.
That's great. How are you localizing then with the different countries and cultures? I mean, I know you're talking about translating in different languages and stuff, but how else are you really creating a native experience?
Well, all these folks, they tend to come from the countries that speak those languages. So we definitely are very, very aware of what might be a good, proper native experience. So they're all native speakers, but they typically also live in that country. So they're very up to date with what's going on in that country and all the sensitivities and so on. So we can definitely adjust it appropriately.
That's great. Have you had any interesting learning moments, where you did something that didn't go quite right or well, and you learned from it and corrected it? Do you have any interesting stories to share?
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing that comes to mind right away is just simply working with the people, working with they're all lovely people, but they're all very different, right? So, when I work with people from Austria, for instance, that it's a very different experience from working with people from South America. So there's a different emphasis on what people find important, and what perhaps one culture likes to get to the point a bit quicker, and others have enjoy starting the meeting with a joke, like that kind of thing. Like there's a big difference between how people operate. That's probably actually one of the biggest learning experiences for me, that just working with 53 linguists from all over the world.
I love it. It's amazing those stories and those moments where you can just learn so much. Being curious too, like I was mentioning earlier, having that curiosity and listening and observing. It's amazing what you can learn. I love it. I mean, I'm one of those people that's kind of weird in the sense of that I really love experiencing so many different types of people and cultures and everything. And I mean, it's not a weird thing. I think it's a good thing. I just feel like a lot of people that I see locally, they don't share that, unfortunately. So they're a little more set in their ways, but that's the way things are. We're trying to encourage them to go the right way. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, it's fantastic to learn from each other, obviously, and but also within different disciplines. Like there's a fancy term I throw around sometimes called interdisciplinary cross-pollination.
Oh, I like that.
Where you learn from disciplines and you apply them to other disciplines. And I mean, there's perhaps no other discipline than translation that applies to perhaps most of all, because you're really applying various ways of doing things, ways of thinking, different emphasis, and so on. And you're learning from each other, and you're applying it to each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a gamer. I love gaming. And over the years, I've seen fascinating, we're going to call them translations, and there's so much more that goes into that, because obviously it's not just a language translation, but it's cultural. It's so many different things. And I'll play these different games that are made in other countries, and you just go, okay, let me understand what is going on right now and why the characters look this way and what is going on with this lore and this story. And there's so much, if you actually look into different video games, so much that goes into it that you can really see that cultural representation. And half the time we probably don't even understand it, but it's fascinating to kind of get to know that. And then you kind of wonder, is this getting translated correctly? I'm not sure if it is, so it's just interesting to kind of learn those things and experience in them. Well, I'm curious about a cultural experience that you've had that's impacted you in a big way.
Well, a really big one for me was when I was a teenager. I worked at 3 different restaurants, but one of the restaurants was a Thai restaurant, and I was in the Netherlands then, and I worked for this Thai chef, and he was he grew up on the streets, so he had built up his his art and science of working in the kitchen, and he had won an award and everything. So he was brought over to the Netherlands, and I ended up working with him directly. So there were only two of us in the kitchen, and he was just incredible. Like, he was such an interesting person. Like, he had done all sorts of things to survive and to make money, little bits of money, and then he was so generous. He was unbelievably generous. Like, at one point I was going through something, just a difficult situation. I was coming home late from work. It was 3 a.m. But I was going through something very difficult. But I showed up at his doorstep because I knew he was just that kind of person, and he acted as if it was 6 p.m. And I literally showed up at 3 a.m. And he was like, "Hey, how's it going, Edwin? Just let me in." And we just chat. He knew that he could tell that I was working through something in my mind. And he was just chatting about that. He offered me a beer, and as if it was normal to show up at 3 a.m. But yeah, I learned that from him. And I tried to take that on board and learn from that, because I felt like that was probably heavily connected with the way he was personally, but also just the Thai culture. It was it was quite evident.
So Thai culture is like that, where you can show up on a friend's doorstep at 3 a.m. and most of the time they're going to be okay with that, or was that more of his personal experience?
I don't know. From what I could tell, it was cultural. We'll have to find out. Maybe we'll have to see in the comments. If there's more stories from Thailand like that. But he was definitely like that.
That's so fascinating. I think of stories. You don't hear about that as much anymore, but I think of stories, maybe 20, 30, well, probably, let's say 30 years plus ago. Let's go with that. I don't know. But I think of stories like that where you hear where things like that would happen, and people are like, "Hey, come on in, no worries," and you look at it like on if you watch older movies or TV shows or something, you'll see that kind of thing too, or you'll hear about it with older generations that have that same type of friendship still to this day. And then you go, okay, where did it change and why? Did we become more like our personal space is very important? Is that a cultural thing? There's a lot of questions I have with that, because that's exceptional. And that's the kind of friend we need to be. Yeah.
I mean, that's why we need to just make sure that we have good connections with people, and make sure that we can learn from that. We're not, narrow-minded, I guess. And you're just open to understanding what might be possible, because otherwise we just kind of end up in either our own little worlds or just in a silo or echo chamber of some sort.
Yeah. And being observational too. So if you observe that a friend is looking like they're in distress or in a time of need, stop what you're doing if you're able to, and invite them in and ask, be there for them. That's I mean, easier said than done, but it's a simple process at least.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Do you have any crazy localization or translation stories? I'm just randomly bringing this one up, like seeing if you have anything fun to share on that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if it was fun, but I I made a big mistake.
It was once. A good learning moment, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it was fun, but it was interesting. Like, it was. What happened was we had made a book, and what had happened was, now thankfully this was a low circulation situation, so it was going to be printed at a little local printer, and it wasn't a lot of them, thankfully. But what happened was, I had finished this, and I had given it to one of our production assistants and said, "Okay, this is done. Can you please send it to the printer?" And they did. And what then ended up happening was, one of the audience members handed it to the CEO and said, "This is the product that your guys have produced," and it was awful. It was just like, it was the whole combination of English and the target language, and it wasn't finished. It was a draft.
Oh no!
It was like the worst localization job you could possibly think of. And I ended up getting that back on my desk, and then I was just really, really, I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but thankfully there was a lot of mercy in that moment, and they understood what had happened, and thankfully we could resolve it. But ever since then, that was very early on, and when I started doing this, like this is almost 20 years ago now. But ever since then, I've always double checked everything and just made sure that things are done really well, and then try to train people as such. Like double check, like check yourself, don't trust yourself, double check yourself.
Oh yeah,
and take ownership, in the right way, and because at least if you take ownership, we can resolve it and move forward. But if you don't want to get in a situation where you're all pointing fingers at each other and nothing gets resolved, and then there's there's no path forward, like not a positive path forward. So that was a really, really good learning moment. But I also realized like the importance of getting it right, in that moment.
Absolutely. Well, it's easy to miss things. And I find, this is something that any of us do regardless, especially when you get busy or you've got too many things that you're dealing with at the same time. And it's just so easy that what you would normally catch the first time, you miss that time. Just that one time you miss it, you move on. You've never made that mistake before, but today you did. So you're right. It's so important to be able to go and double check everything and realize too that we're human. We're going to make mistakes. It happens. Just double check it and make sure it goes out. So that's a great lesson. The other lesson that I love that you brought up too was the grace that your CEO, your whoever was I guess he was in charge over you, but the grace that he showed you was really important too, because that could have easily been a very tough, example learning moment in that time.
Oh yeah. Well, it was definitely tough, but it was definitely also a serious moment. There was a serious conversation to be had. It was like, okay, how are we going to try to avoid this from happening? And but yeah, definitely, like that's a leadership lesson right there. And I think that was also really, really that definitely is a lesson by itself. Yeah, understanding what it is that you need to do when something happens, and especially if you're working with folks that are under you or in as far as like they're reporting to you, then you need to just make sure that you're also training them right. Not that, like in that case, I should have probably been more alert, like a understanding like how careful something should be handled, how careful a product should be handled. But yeah, we're dealing with within our organization, we're dealing with very high impact content, so we need to really always double checking ourselves. So we set up, ever since then we've only strengthened our processes, constantly improving our processes, so that we're incorporating the possibility of making a mistake, and then we can make sure that we prevent that from happening as much as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Hey, are you enjoying the Native Experience podcast? I sure hope you are. Soon, you'll be able to read Native Experience, the book. Even more amazing content, tips, tricks, and advice on creating a Native experience. Our CEO, Mark Saba, is sharing the complete blueprint we use at Lexigo for effective and authentic engagement, all in one practical, cultural, insight-packed book. This book is perfect for marketers, communication professionals, business leaders, and anyone eager to connect deeply across languages and cultures. Join the waitlist today for exclusive offers and updates over at lexigo.com/NX. And here is the episode. So share a scenario. Let's just say that what I wanted to get out here too is the impact that it would have. But let's say that you don't double check your work. You're not going through the correct process. You produce something, you print something, whatever. It goes out and it's wrong. It's incorrect. It's translated incorrectly. What's the impact that it has on those receiving it?
Well, I think that has to do with the domain that if we work in several different ones, like we have religion, that's incredibly impactful, obviously, because we're talking about a belief system of people. So obviously, if you have a mistranslation in something like that, it can cause an unbelievable course of action, in a person that you would have to address in one way or another. But then there's also other fields, like if we are working in archaeology, for instance, which is a totally different domain, which we actually do. We work on like in archaeological excavations and so on. And we, when we publish excavation site, well, that has to do with the way history is understood. So
yeah.
So I don't know, like how you can measure something like that. That's like putting a price on the items in the museum.
Yeah.
That doesn't. You don't really normally put prices on those items because they're priceless.
Sure.
So I think that when you're dealing with high level impact content like that, well, then you really, really, really have to learn your lesson in double checking and making sure that you're really careful.
Yeah.
And and taking breaks. Like I actually talk a lot about with our linguists, especially our very high level ones. I talk a lot about being balanced and not like like constantly like pushing yourself to the very, very limit, because that's when all these errors start creeping in, like when you're. So I try to build our processes so that there is a very balanced situation where people can even enjoy their work. They can enjoy it. They can still produce like great amounts of work. Like they actually are very, very productive, but they are not pushed to the limit where they are totally stressed out. Maybe they have to do a lot of context switching from one thing to the other. And then we're just really prone to error. So we're just trying to reduce all of that in order to make sure that we're able to produce the highest quality possible.
That's good. It's interesting. I'm reminded of a situation that just happened. We follow a college basketball team, and they're doing very well right now. And they had a really bad loss to a team they should not have lost to. And it really affected them mentally, and emotionally and stuff. And it was one of those, what happened? Why did this happen kind of questions, And so the coach, instead of saying, let's just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, said, these guys are exhausted. They've been on the road for a while. They're making stupid mistakes right now. We're just going to go and we're going to play kickball in the field and just laugh and have fun. That's it. No practice. We're not even going to plan for the next game. We're just going to have fun, and then we'll be fine. And they were. Yeah. And it's like, that's what's interesting, is because, you see a thing like that and there's so much pressure. You got to win. You got to practice. You got to prepare. I'm a musician. Same kind of thing. If I over practice, I get worse. And so it's essential to do, what you need to do. You do your part, you're prepared, but then you just got to step back, take a rest, and say, I'm good. I'm going to go play for a while. I'm going to go do something different. I'm going to rest, and then you're fine. It's amazing. So I really appreciate that balance that you're mentioning, because I think it's essential to making less mistakes and actually being at your best too. And we don't give that enough credit.
Right. Yeah. It's very important to be balanced, but it's not easy. Like I think that
not at all.
Sometimes we think that balance is a real art, and science in some ways, but you do have to, and I think people approach it differently. Like I do actually schedule my balance.
That's good.
But that's because I like scheduling things, but otherwise I would miss it,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's right. I need to spend time with this person, or I need to relax now.
Yeah.
otherwise I might forget. Not everybody is like that, of course, but you don't have to schedule your enjoyment of life, but in every single instance, but it is important. But sometimes you do, otherwise it might not happen.
True. Yeah, they recommend that. Actually, it's important. It's interesting. We a lot of conversations here when it involves translation and localization. There's a lot of impact on the need to respect others. What is being done is typically in an effort to truly respect and value each person from, different countries, cultures, languages, etc. There's a lot with that. But it's interesting that, the magnitude of what you're talking about, that an incorrect translation could cause a religious cult, or, somebody could take that, interpret it in a way that's not correct and go off on some crazy crusade or something. You just don't know, right? The impact that could have, or like you were talking about, changing history or something. And there are people that right now are trying to change history, which is fascinating to me. So you see these big impacts that could really come from it. So it's just amazing to me how important, I continue to learn how important localization really is, and how essential it is to get it right, to do it to the best of your ability, to truly understand it, to be curious. Like, I keep hearing these things over and over and over, but even continuing to hear the magnitude of how powerful, a mistake could basically be, I guess would be the way to put it. So yeah, and then hearing the importance of rest and balance and all of that. This is all so essential into doing what you're doing. And then you mentioned earlier in the show the Toyota Kata. So explain a little bit more about that. And I'm assuming this all relates to what we've been talking about, but explain more of what it is and how you're utilizing it and how you even recommend we utilize it.
Yeah, Toyota Kata is really interesting. I mean, I studied project management and such, but this is an interesting methodology that Toyota used for a long time. Then now relatively recently they've started moving away from it to a certain degree, but from what I can tell, that actually hasn't had the best of fruits. Even from when you look at the community that speaks about this topic, they are recognizing that actually this original method that has been described is actually very effective for continuous improvement, and also what is baked into that is the respect for people.
Yeah,
which is what we were just discussing. But Mike Rother is an author who wrote the book Toyota Kata, and then there are others who have written about it as well. Like Jeffrey Liker is another who wrote a book called Toyota Way. And there's ways that you can practice this. If you read those books, you can see that there are methods of practicing this continuous improvement in a very practical way. And a lot of it is about, it actually overlaps with education. So there's a way to help other people understand things, and it isn't necessarily to give them the answer every single time, right?
Yeah.
So like if you're working with children, for instance, that, you wouldn't want to just give them the answers every single time. Like,
sure.
What is the, I learned this from my brother. I would say when I was a child, I would say, what is this? And then just give me the answer. I just need to know for my homework. And he would say, you got to go look it up in the encyclopedia, or you got to think of it this way. And he never gave me the answer, which always frustrated me when I was young.
Yeah.
But now I understand that, because there's a fancy term called constructivism, which I'm not even sure if that's exactly right. But that has to do with building the idea by the person themselves in their mind, and this has a lot to do with the right way of coaching. Anyway, that's all a little bit academic, perhaps, what I'm saying, but in practical form, it boils down to what is the process that we follow to produce products. And a translation can be considered a product, like any. If you take a Word document, you have a source document. Well, you need to have, at the end, you need to have a product into the target language. So how do we do that? How do we do that in the best way possible, and at the highest quality possible, which is also what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So you just constantly, you're looking at the process, you build it out, basically just like a car is manufactured in the car industry, which is on this, this continuous loop, or this loop, and everybody constantly adding a value at different steps, and you break it down, and then you can see, when you break it down in enough smaller steps, you can start to see where the process is failing, or where it could be improved. And I think that's sometimes where we don't go far enough with project management. We don't always look at the small steps that are being taken.
Yeah.
And then some things go wrong, but then we don't really know why it went wrong. And that's what this what Toyota Kata, what I'm studying, it gets into that kind of thing. Like just looking at actually every step in the process, even the little steps, and then you can start to see where you might make improvements.
That's interesting. And you're right that we don't really understand what went wrong half the time. And part of it is you just don't know. And even though you try to figure it out, you're going, I still don't understand what went wrong. There is a reason, like we know there's a reason, but we don't know why, and we don't know what that reason is. Do they have any suggestions on how to find that if you're truly not able to know?
Yeah, lots of suggestions, including being close to the process. Sometimes people are just simply not close enough to the process. And one interesting story I think from the car industry is that they'll have senior leaders. They'll onboard them, but they'll bring them right into the on the line. Like on the production line. They'll bring them there. They'll say, okay, we'll work with this small, tiny team, even though they're very senior leader, meant to be. They they have them work, right on the line, and they'll say, okay, try to find improvements, try to find things that you can improve, and then they need to find different things, and then the coach will tell them, like, okay, that you found 7 things, but this other team found 20 things. Like, what is it? Why is it that you only found 7 things?
Yeah.
And then, they're constantly teaching them, they're showing having them observe, they're having them walk around instead of, being in your office somewhere in distance. That's not going to be that great, because when it comes down to it, if you're looking at the quality of a product, well, that is not made in an office, in a distant place. Like it's made on the floor. Like you gotta go there, and have a look and see what's actually happening. So one thing I think that I'm learning from that is not to be afraid of the truth, and not being afraid of uncertainty, because you want to make sure that you're understanding what's actually happening versus what the supposed plan is. And then you want to make sure that you experiment towards more certainty, towards greater quality, rather than being afraid of uncertainty and maybe never trying to improve it, because you're a bit scared to see what is really happening.
Yeah, you're right. And not to mention, you might be a little bit too proud of what you've created. And so it's hard to see the flaws, if you know what I mean, too. You're like, oh, no, it's good. We're good. This is a great thing. Yeah, you're just not willing to see those flaws. It's interesting when you mentioned both teams, how one team saw 7 issues and, another one found more. It's like, I got to thinking about, this is something that, I nerd out on so many different things. And so, recently I'm looking at van RVs just for fun, because it's like, it'd be kind of, well, what's interesting is seeing all these videos of people walking around and saying, yeah, look, see, plenty of room. And then I find out these people are 5'5", 5'9", I'm 6'4". So I go, okay, what about me? Do I fit in that? Because so far I've seen no 6'4" people try to fit into any of these vans at all. I mean, would I be bent over? Could I even get into the bathroom? Little things like that. Or you think about it with flying economy, on planes and stuff like that. And I'll see people who are like, oh, this is a wonderful, look, this economy seat's great. I've got so much room. I'm only 5'4". And I'm like, dude, of course you have room at 5'4". Yeah, I mean, no offense, but short people have a lot of advantages, and so do tall people. We have a lot of advantages too, but those are disadvantages that shorter people would never think of. And so perhaps some of the people on that team that found more issues, they have a different perspective that the other team didn't have because of who they are or their experiences or whatever the case may be. And so they were able to see more problems that the other team just wouldn't have seen. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's just kind of an interesting thought to kind of discuss a little bit, is each of our experiences, each of who we are, brings forth different types of things that we're going to see, different perspectives, of course, that others might not see, and vice versa too.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have lots of different perspectives in order to find the right solutions. It reminds me of, I think there was I forget which book that was, but there's a lab where they just couldn't figure something out, and it was all biologists, and then they brought in some other guys from a different field, and then all of a sudden they were able to help each other finding solutions for problems because they were looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I just read something very interesting too that kind of goes hand in hand with this, with what we do, what we provide, and that kind of thing. Customers, clients, whatever you want to call them, they don't care about your ideas. They only care about the solution that you're giving them. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that I think we get caught up on with, oh, this is a great feature or this is a great idea that we could offer. But we're not asking what's the customer or the recipient, what is it they need? What's the solution they're wanting that we can provide for them? And that's that's more of a high level entrepreneurial business, management kind of thing. But at the same time, it's just an interesting thought that I read. And I thought, we get way too caught up on ideas and features and not on the solutions. Because you just said that we're solving a problem.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I love this kind of conversation. I really have fun with it. But, well, so what do you recommend then? So as we're moving forward, trying to provide a native experience, and again, I know a lot of us that there's going to be the business side of providing a native experience, like what you do. There's also going to be the personal side too. But what pieces of advice and tips, what do you have for us? What advice do you have for us as we, wrap up to provide that native experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's important to think about perhaps is what would happen if we all spoke the same language? Would there still be what is the need then at that point? Because I think what is important to understand then is that people will still be different. They'll still think differently. They'll still put emphasis on certain ideas and concepts and things more than other people would. And, I think what's important to understand is how do people actually think, and what is important to them, and what are the differences, and what are the opportunities because of that? But also perhaps what are the limitations? So I think it's always important to continuously study and learn more. And that way we can actually have a true bridge as we, I think a lot of people always talk about translation and forming bridges, but it's not just, or localization or even native experiences. Like it's not just the words that are being used. It is the ideas that are being shared. Because I think when we talk about communities, I think I saw a really great quote the other day that it was from Suzanne Goldsmith. She said something like, now I'm paraphrasing, so it's like something like communities are not built of friends or groups within similar styles and tastes, or even people who like and understand each other, but they're built of people who feel they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. So that's also an interesting one, because it's like, okay, what is actually important? What is it that is truly important? Like, is it just to sell products, or is it just to get more money, or is it actually to build these meaningful relationships and opportunity, while still providing opportunities for one another? And we do need money, like it's an enabler of other opportunities. But what is it that will help us all thrive? Rather than bringing others down. Like and how can we clarify things for each other? Yeah, and it's just important to remember that's actually a higher level than simply translating words.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that so much. It's so true. I think the higher level aspect in general, we're starting to see that a little bit more. I think we're seeing entities and businesses and companies are starting to say we need a higher level approach. Like you said, it's not just the translating, or it's not just about the money. There are those companies that's all it is for them, and that's too bad. But I'm glad that we're starting to see that higher level approach now, and I would agree with you that that's something we need to all strive for. So, love it, Edwin. Thank you. I appreciate this. This was a great conversation. It's all right. We said this before we got on the mic, just to say time flies when you get onto these conversations, and I'm realizing, wow, we're out of time already. But thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time today and joining, and I know we could probably continue to go on for another hour.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that. Appreciate the opportunity. All the best with everything.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Edwin Trebels, Translations Director at Philadelphia Church of God. And my name is Brian. Thank you for joining us. So excited. Love to hear from you. nx@lexigo.com for questions and comments. Don't forget to check out the Native Experience book, lexigo.com/nx. Remember to always strive for authenticity and embrace the power of Native experiences.